Hello, everyone. My name is Nina Jane, and I am the programming librarian at the Cary Library, and I'm really thrilled to be bringing this program to us this week, this beautiful Saturday morning. So thank you for joining us. I just wanted to say a couple things. One is I would like to thank the Cary Library Foundation for sponsoring all of our adult programs, and I would like to also say that we are going to have, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. I'll take care of making sure Jean has them for during the presentation and after. I would like to introduce Jean. She is one of our reference librarians extraordinaire, and she is also an avid bird watcher in Lexington. She's lived in Lexington for a long time and knows the local birds. So she's also one of our reference librarians, as I mentioned, and so a hallmark of a reference librarian is if she doesn't know the answer, she will find it for you. So please feel free to ask lots and lots of questions, because between the two of us, we will get you the answers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jean, and she can get started.
Okay, thank you very much, Mina, and I'm so glad to see so many people here. Gives me a chance to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is birds. My friends know that it's one of my favorites. I've been watching birds all my life. I grew up in a small city in Wisconsin with parents who were bird watchers. We went frequently Sunday drives out into the country to look for birds. We went on camping trips, and birds have been a part of my life since I was tiny. I've lived in Lexington for almost 50 years now in the same house. And about 25 years ago, my husband and I started keeping a list of all the birds that we had seen in our yard and in our immediate neighborhood. And we're up to, right now, 87 species of birds. I don't expect that you would be able to see that many birds in your yard. We're really fortunate in where we live, although it's right in the center of Lexington. We're between a wooded conservation land and a small wetland. So we get a lot of birds from those locations that might not come into your yard, but you probably are seeing quite a few of the same birds that I'm going to talk about today. I decided between these two programs that I'm doing that I'm going to divide the birds into two groups. The first group that I'm going to talk about today are the birds that live with us all year round. They're not migratory. They are here in the winter as well as in the summer. Next month, I will, in the program, I'll talk about the birds that migrate, the birds that come into our area to breed in the summer or spend the winter with us and go somewhere else to breed. And I'll talk a little bit about bird migration in general, but for today, I'm going to focus on those birds that are really endemic to our area, and we can see them any time of year. And then later on in this, first I'm going to show you some pictures of birds and talk about the individual species, but then afterwards I want to show you the Birds of the World database, which is one of the treasures that Cary Library owns, and you have access to because you're a Lexington resident and a Cary Library member. So let's go to the birds now, and I'm going to share my screen with you and put on my slides. So it's on, right?
Yes, yeah. That worked.
Okay, good. Okay, so here's our first bird, and this is probably the bird that most people recognize. It's the American robin. There are other robins in the world, but this is our robin. It's found all over the country. It's really an abundant bird, and it's one of the birds that its abundance is increasing because it's very adaptable to human living. It likes to forage in short grass, so lawns are something that are very conducive to having robins. It's very willing to live near people. It will often nest on houses, on windowsills, on under porches. If you're lucky enough, you might see a baby robin in the nest right outside your own window. You might notice that the males and females look very much alike, but the male is in coloration more intense. The red breast is more intense. The head is blacker. The female is just more muted. This picture makes it look as if she's bigger than the male, but really she's actually a little bit smaller. Generally, the males get very large, especially in the spring. And as you can see, the juvenile robin has spots on the breast, and it will keep these spots until the first molt in the fall, and when all the feathers fall off, and then it will either look like a female or a male. After that, the robin is the largest thrush in America. And thrushes are birds that sing a lot, and robins actually are great singers, although you don't always hear them singing. They generally also make a lot of kind of clucking noises. They sound a little bit like chickens. The robin is the traditional early bird that gets the worm. Sometimes if you're lying awake in the morning in the wee hours, the first bird that you'll hear will be a robin singing. And oftentimes the last bird in the evening is a robin singing. They eat insects mostly in the summer and the spring. And then as the summer goes on and small fruits appear, berries, little crab apples, things like that, it will shift to eating a more vegetable diet. You might think that robins are a bird of spring, and you say, well, what do you mean the robins live with us all year round, because I don't see them in the winter time? Well, they actually don't migrate very far. They do join up into flocks in the winter, and they move around. They will move a short distance south if the winter gets too heavy around here, too much snow, too deep. The flocks will shift down south a bit, but then they come back when the winter opens up. And if we have a really open winter, they may stay around all winter long. But you can often see flocks of robins, 20, 30, 40 robins on places, on open fields in the very early spring. Places like Hayden Field is a place where robins like to gather. So now I'm going to move on to another bird that's very common, which is the blue jay. Blue jay is a bird that says its name. Its alarm call is jay, 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 which is just kind of a coincidence because the name jay comes from the French word gay or jay, which refers to the colors, not the sound, but it does happen to make a kind of jay sound. Blue jays are large birds. They're about 11 inches long. They're omnivorous. They will eat anything. If you put pieces of bread out on your lawn, they'll swoop down and pick it up. They have incredible eyesight, and they even though you don't see them, they're watching their territory very carefully to see when a piece of food might appear, and they will go and get it. They live in small flocks, which are usually all related birds. You sometimes see a flock of blue jays mobbing a crow or a hawk if one of those predators ventures into their territory, and they make a lot of noise about it. If you hear a crowd of jays calling and calling repetitively, you know that there's some kind of problem there. And if you go and investigate, you'll probably find a hawk or maybe an owl perched in a tree or a cat nearby. And the jays are determined to get rid of that thing. They also make a lot of other noises. They can mimic other birds' songs very well. They do a wonderful imitation of the cry of a red-tailed hawk, which they sometimes, some people think they use it to distract other birds from the food. The sexes of robins look, blue jays look just alike. They're not at all different. I can't tell the difference. An interesting thing about blue jays is that in 1999, there was a terrific outbreak of West Nile virus, which affected birds in our area, and especially the corvids, which are the jays and the crows. And the blue jay population was practically wiped out. For a couple of years, we didn't see any blue jays at all. But then the population started to rebound, and now we're pretty much back to the level that we've seen in the past, blue jays. So here's another bird that's very common. This is the mourning dove. It's the only kind of dove that we have in this area. It's a big bird. It's about 12 inches long. You'll mainly see it walking around on the ground, although its wings make a beautiful whistling sound when it rises up into flight. The sound of the dove is something that I'm sure we've all heard, and for me it's just a wonderful sound of spring and summer, which is the cooing of the mourning doves. And I could try to imitate it. They go coo, 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 coo. The sexes of these birds look alike, but they obviously can tell the difference because they are prolific breeders. They go through several nests a year. They start very early in the spring and they continue on late into the fall when you think other birds would be done with this. But the interesting thing about mourning doves is that they don't live very long. The average age of a mourning dove is only a year. So these doves that we're seeing in our yard are really quite youngsters and they don't last long. I think maybe because they're very easy prey for hawks. And you'll often see a little pile of mourning dove feathers on your yard if a hawk has gotten one. Here's our state bird. It's the only bird actually that's the state bird of two states, of Maine and Massachusetts. And it's the chickadee, another bird that says its name. This one is a little tiny thing. It's only 5 inches long from beak to tail. Chickadees are seed and insect eaters. They're quite omnivorous, and they live in, they make cavity nests. So they dig holes in trees, in dead trees, or they use a hole that's already been dug by some other bird. In the wintertime, they will cache food. They will take seeds and nuts and stick them into the bark of trees and then come back later and eat them when they need them. And in the wintertime, they do need to eat a lot because they are so tiny. They could easily, freeze in the wintertime without a lot of energy. One of the things that a chickadee can do, though, is that it has the capability of lowering its body temperature at night. So it finds a cozy place in a shrub or under snow-covered tree branch, and it will go into kind of a torpid state and actually reduce everything about its body function to almost zero. And that's the way it conserves energy during the night so that it can get through a really cold winter without any problem. So next bird is the American goldfinch. Now, a lot of people think that goldfinches don't stay with us in the winter because they don't see the yellow and black that's such a signature of the male goldfinch. But actually what happens with goldfinches is that in the fall molt, the male loses all of these bright yellow feathers, and it takes on the kind of olive drab feathers that the female has all year round. So when you see a small bird, and they are small, they're only about 5 inches long, you see a small bird in the wintertime and you wonder, what is that bird? If you see these white wing bars, this is a mark of the goldfinch that makes it easy to identify. Sparrows and other little brown birds don't have these white wing bars. So this will make it easy to notice the goldfinches. Now, goldfinches are a little different than other birds in our area in that they breed quite late in the summer. They're almost entirely seed eaters. They don't eat insects much at all. And they're one of the few birds that doesn't even feed insects to its babies. So they are eating seeds, picking them off everywhere, the leftover ones in the spring, and then as the new ones come in the summer and the late summer, they'll eat the fresh seed. And they digest the seeds and then regurgitate these mashed seeds to feed their babies. So they're almost entirely insectivorous birds. This is our most common woodpecker, and it's a very small woodpecker. It's the smallest one in the area. It's only 6 3/4 inches long or so. The males and females look very much alike, except, as you'll notice, the male has this bright red patch on the back of its head. So that distinguishes the two of them. Woodpeckers peck insects out of bark, which is why they're called woodpeckers. And they are very good with their chisel-like beaks. They're very good at making holes in trees. Only really in dead wood, though. They don't attack living trees generally. They might try to put a hole in your house, of course, but there are ways to discourage that. But they are cavity nesters, and one of the great things about downies is that they will make a lot of holes in the spring. Before they choose one, they'll try several others. So that leaves a lot of abandoned holes that other birds take advantage of, like chickadees and titmice. So there is another woodpecker in our area, which is less common. The downies are very common and very successful, but there's another woodpecker called the hairy woodpecker, which looks almost like a downy. I mean, the coloring of the back and the head is nearly identical, except they have a little more hairy feathers up here around the beak, and that's why they're called hairies. But that's very subtle. You won't be able to notice that at a distance. The real difference between the downy and the hairy is size. The hairy woodpeckers are much larger. They're about, half again as large or more, maybe twice as large as a downy. So if you see a bigger woodpecker and you think, oh, that woodpecker is a bit too large to be the tiny downy, then it's probably the hairy woodpecker. Both of them stay with us all winter long. Here is one of the few true sparrows that stays with us all winter. And this is the song sparrow. And it also is the sparrow that has a beautiful song. I'll play it for you later when we get to the database. It's distinguished by this dark dot on the chest. And if you can get a glimpse of the front of this bird and you see a dark dot there, you know that you're looking at a song sparrow. They nest very close to the ground, strangely enough, sometimes right on the ground. And in dense shrubbery, they'll nest in the low branches, maybe not more than a meter off the ground. So this, of course, makes them vulnerable to cats, and that's something that we have to watch out for. Another small bird that stays with us all winter, mostly, sometimes the females will migrate a little further south in the winter, is the white-breasted nuthatch. Now these birds are often seen upside down on branches. If you see a bird crawling along a tree upside down, hanging upside down under branches, it's probably the nuthatch. The males and females look very much alike, but the females' heads are slightly more gray, more slate gray. You can see the male has a very dark black stripe on its head, but sometimes you can't really tell the difference. They also nest in cavities. They nest in old woodpecker holes, and they can also, they're capable of digging out their own holes. Now the next 5 birds, actually the last 5 that I'm going to show you, are birds that are recent arrivals to New England. They have not been here more than 100 years, most of them much less. It's interesting to look at old books about birds to see, what was common at the time. And in the History to the Town of Lexington that was written by Charles Hudson, is a reference book that we use a lot in the library. It was published in 1913, and the back of this book has an appendix of all the birds that live in Lexington with annotations as to whether they are abundant or common or uncommon or rare. And it's fascinating to look at this list and to see what is common now that wasn't common then, and vice versa. Of the birds that are recent arrivals to New England, probably the most colorful one that we've all seen is the cardinal, the northern cardinal. The male is, of course, brilliant red. The female has the same shape, same size, but her colors are much more muted. I think the females are very beautiful birds with these sort of pinkish wings and tail, and of course the bright pink beak that both of them have. They have these big finch-like beaks. They're very good at cracking seeds. They love sunflower seeds. And, they're about 8 3/4, 9 inches long, so sort of a medium-sized bird. The males are great singers. They begin singing very commonly in late February, so they're one of the first sounds of spring. They also will eat fruit and they'll eat insects, and that's one reason why they're able to live around here now. They were first reported nesting in Massachusetts in 1958. And so if you've been around since before then, you probably never saw a cardinal. And now they have become quite common. They've moved up from the south. They were birds of the south. And they've been able to make New England their home because, southern New England, really not northern, because the winters are getting milder, because people have planted a lot of berry producing shrubs and trees and little crabapple trees and things like that that are enough to give the birds some food in the wintertime. And because people are feeding birds in bird feeders, and it makes it possible for these birds to get through the winter here in our territory. Now this one is another newcomer. This bird was first reported in the 1940s in Massachusetts. It's the tufted titmouse. This is a tiny little bird. It's only 6.5 inches long, but it has a very loud voice, a great variety of calls and sounds. They're also cavity nesters. They don't really make their own nests. They often use other birds' nests. But if you ever hear a bird making a lot of noise and it's very loud and you don't recognize it, it's probably a tufted titmouse. Another really loud bird that we've heard a lot this summer is the Carolina wren. Now, The Carolina wren first came into our area in the 1980s. I remember hearing it the first time myself. The population expanded up into southern New England, southern Massachusetts, really, in the 1980s. And it's very sensitive. It remains very sensitive to cold winters. So when we had the Snowmageddon winter a few years back, the population of Carolina wrens was pretty much decimated. And for a year or two, we didn't hear them in our yard at all. But then they began to bounce back, and last year and this year, they're really around a lot. They have a very loud voice for such a little bird. In fact, there's a Native American name for the Carolina wren, which means literally little bird with a big voice. And they sing a lot all through the day, through most of the year. They will sing in the wintertime when no other birds are singing. One of these Carolina wrens that was held in captivity was recorded as singing its song 3,000 times a day. Only the males sing, so you know when you hear it, you're just hearing the male. What they do is they mark off their territory, and the male will spend his day flying around to the different corners of his property, giving off his call, it's always similar shape, although it sometimes is a little bit different sound, but it's 3 or 4 repeated notes, multi-syllable notes, kind of monotone. And a lot of people use a mnemonic device to remember it, which is tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. My Carolina wrens, I think they sound more like teacher, teacher, teacher. But that may be just our critters here. So here's another woodpecker, and this woodpecker is larger. This is the red-bellied woodpecker. It's 9 inches long, larger than the downies, even a little larger than the hairies. And it's a very recent newcomer also. Its range expanded into New England in the 1980s. And it's another bird that I remember hearing and seeing for the first time in the early 80s. The first time I heard the call of the woodpecker, before I had even seen one, I thought, what is that bird? It sounds like a bleating lamb. It makes a bleating sound. I can't even imitate it myself, but it's not really a song. It's kind of more of a call. But you can tell the difference between males and females of this bird because the male has a red stripe that extends from the back of its head all the way to the top of its beak. So it's solid. It's a solid red stripe there. The female's stripe goes up to the back of her head, but then there's a gap, a gray area. So just look at the head stripe and you'll be able to tell whether you're seeing a male or a female. Now you might say to yourself, why is this bird called red-bellied? Why isn't it called red-headed? Well, it actually does have a patch of sort of, I wouldn't call it red, maybe orange or pink, but it's way down low on its belly, really under its tail. And you don't get to see it unless you happen to be able to see this bird upside down, hanging upside down, or doing something unusual with its body so that it's showing that part of its body. And why isn't it called red-headed? Well, it's not called red-headed because there is another bird called the red-headed woodpecker, which is not seen in our area very often. It's quite rare, and its entire head is red. And it has big, bold black and white patches on its body. So if you see a bird whose entire head is red, you know that is actually a red-headed woodpecker, and this one is a red-bellied woodpecker. The last newcomer I'm going to show you is the house finch. This bird it's a native bird. It's from North America, but it's not from anywhere around here, and it didn't come up here naturally. It was brought and released. A pair of them were brought as pet birds, kept in cages, but unfortunately released in New York in the 1930s. So this bird is very successful here. It's spread out all over the eastern part of the country. And from some releases in the West, it has moved from its real native habitat, which is the Southwest, the desert areas. It has moved all through the West as well. And then the two populations have joined in the middle because the prairie states are no longer an obstacle to bird migration because people have planted so many trees and you know, put up bird feeders and done the same things that we do here. So the birds have traveled all across the country. These are finches, and they're mostly seed eaters. You can see they have the big finch bills. Even though it's a small bird, it's only 6 inches long. The females look a lot like sparrows, but you can tell that they have stripy breasts, and they're usually in the company of a male that has red on its head and chest. Not the ones I see aren't usually quite as brilliant as this one. I think this picture might have been taken in the Southwest where they have a more brilliant color. But sometimes in the spring they do get pretty red. They have, I think, supplanted some other finches. The purple finch is now pretty uncommon in our area, and it may be because of competition with this house finch. Speaking of competition, though, there are 3 other species that I want to show you. These are invasive species of birds. They are not native to North America. The first one here is the European starling. And it was brought, we even know the name of the person who brought it. It was brought by a man named Eugene Schieffelin into Central Park in New York, where it was deliberately released, along with all the other birds that are mentioned in Shakespeare, because Mr. Schieffelin wanted to have, for some reason, all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare living around him. Well, the other birds, the nightingale and the skylark, didn't survive, but unfortunately the starling did survive. It's a very adaptable bird, very aggressive and successful, eats anything, moves around in large flocks, can withstand the winter. So it's with us now rather permanently in sometimes very large flocks, but there is some feeling that the starlings might be dying out finally in North America since 1890, and it's been a long enough stay here. They're very aggressive birds, and they are responsible for some demise of some of our native songbirds. Another bird that has come to us from Europe, from England, is the house sparrow. The house sparrow began here in the US in the 1850s when pet birds were released, again in New York, in Brooklyn this time. And they are incredibly successful. They are now the most widespread bird species in the world. They live on every continent except Antarctica. And they're just a very successful bird. Also, probably because they're omnivorous. They can eat anything. They like to live around humans. They're known as a bird of the farm because they eat spilled grain, and they like to roost in cavities, but they don't make their own nests. They look for a hole somewhere. So if you have a hole in your gutter or a place under your roof where there's a little platform, or if you have an open barn, or if you're a Home Depot store that has the doors open a lot, sparrows will go into any of these holes and make them their nests. And they produce a lot of chicks fast, They also will drive other birds out of their nest holes and kill their chicks, toss out their eggs. So they are responsible for the demise of a lot of native birds. And the third newcomer, not so newcomer because they've been here since the 17th century when the colonists brought them as domestic birds, is the pigeon. And the pigeon is really an escaped domestic bird. It's not exactly the same as the wild rock dove, which still lives in places in Europe and Asia, but it's because pigeons' ancestors were bred to be domestic fowl for food. Pigeons thrive in cities. Again, they're very successful breeders, and they also will eat anything, and they can live on garbage. So that's why they're so common. You've all seen the pictures of the pigeons in St. Mark's Square in Venice. So next month, I'm going to show you some of the birds that migrate, and some of those will be very familiar to you. And then I'm going to give you some tips on how to make your yard more friendly to birds. But right now, I'd like to show you the Birds of the World database. I forgot something. I got to go back here. I also, at the end of my, oops, I did something wrong. At the end of my, let's see, I'll go back to my slideshow here. The end of my presentation here, I'll just whip through it. Sorry, I'm not a pro at this. I have included some information about birds, places to get more information, some resources, some birding websites, a little plug here for my favorite field guide, which is a Sibley Guide to Birds. It's a wonderful field guide. Its only drawback is it's too heavy, but you can get an Eastern version or a Western version. If you're only going to be looking at birds in the East, you might as well just get the Eastern version. And it's only half the weight. So also my favorite birdsong guide, and this is something that was published in 1990. It's a set of 3 CDs. I think there may be a second set in this series also, but it is available in the library and you can still buy it. It's still in print because it's just the best. It's the only bird guide that really talks about birds. Groups the songs by similarity so that you can get over your confusions about different bird songs. Also, if you're interested in binoculars, I suggest that you look on this Audubon website. They have a wonderful guide to buying binoculars. And if you're interested in the little birds at all, especially, it really is important to have binoculars. The other thing that's at the end here are some organizations that lead bird walks in our area. And I recommend, I think, taking a field trip, walking with people who know birds is just the best way to learn about birds and to learn to see them and to hear them. And all of these organizations, the Citizen for Lexington Conservation, the Mass Audubon Society, the Brookline Bird Club, they're all very interested in getting other people involved with birds. So they're the leaders of these bird walks are wonderful teachers, and they really want to get everybody involved. So they'll make sure that when you go, you get to see the birds. And then I've put my own email here at the bottom. This is my work email. So if you have any questions about birds, feel free to email me because I love to answer questions about birds. Now what I want to do is show you, oops, I gotta get out of here. I want to show you the website. Oh dear. if you go to Cary Library's website, and here it is, and you scroll down under collections and resources to the online resources, and then you can either go by topic or alphabetical. If you go to the science and nature topic, the second one here is birds of the world. And you'll see this asterisk. This means that this website is only available to people who are residents of Lexington. And that's because Cary Library pays for this, this database individually. So we use our town funds, so it is just for town residents. And when you open it up, you will be asked to put in your library card number. Because I've already gone into this today, I don't have to put in my library card number. But this is the search page, and you just type in the name of the bird you're looking for, just the common name. You don't need to use the Latin names. And up comes the page about the song sparrow. And you can see some pictures here on the right side, and there's the signature little dot on the breast. And if you go down the page a bit, you'll see a distribution map of the birds. And it shows you here by color, the purple are the birds, the places where the birds live here year round. And you can see Massachusetts is well within the year round distribution of this bird. The orange is birds that breed in the north, but then they migrate down to the blue, down to the non-breeding area. So there are migratory song sparrows, but our song sparrows stay all year round. Now, there's a tremendous amount of information here in this website. You can learn everything you want to know about these birds. And they have also lots of links to resources. If you really are interested in the science of the birds, you can learn a lot from this website. What I like to do is look at the multimedia section, and you will see photos, audio clips, videos, illustrations, figures. Let's listen to the song sparrow now. What I have to do is make sure that, I didn't put the, let's see. I've got to put the sound on so that you can hear it.
Jean, go ahead and play it. I think we'll be able to hear it.
You think it'll work? Okay, I'll give it a try. We'll try. Okay, so I'm going to play you the second one. The great thing about the song sparrow's voice, and you can always recognize it from this, is that they do some little startup notes. Before they start to sing, they'll do a little get ready to go, get into the song. Here, you can hear what I mean. And then after those startup notes, then there's a complicated song that ends in something we can't even hear. But here's another one. So it's that little getting ready thing that distinguishes the song sparrow. Let me also play, I hope everyone could hear that. I'm going to play something from the northern cardinal. And there she is, the female. And you can see her distribution is all over the eastern part of the country and a little bit of the southwest and down into Mexico. But let's play its song here. Oops, I did photos, sorry. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to play the second one because this is typical. This is what you hear early in the spring. Okay, and they're still kind of singing, not as much. It's that tone of voice is really distinctive. Let's see, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to play for you the American Robin so you can hear that their songs and you'll be able to recognize it this evening. Now you see the robin is distributed all over the United States, except in the extreme southwest and southern Florida here. They do move up north, but those northern birds will migrate down into our area and add to those flocks that we see in the wintertime down here. And here's a nice recording of the song of the robin. So I think that's all that I have to share today. So I'm going to stop that and start my video again.
So I want to remind people that you can turn your videos on now if you'd like. And we do have a couple of questions, Jean.
Okay.
Thank you. That was lovely, actually. I just wanted to say that first. So informative. And I love the bird sounds. I'm so glad you shared that with us. Susan asks, have the proliferation of Canadian geese affected the population of local birds?
I don't know that specifically, but I don't think so. Those larger birds are, they live in a very different habitat than the smaller birds. And Canada geese are actually native to our area. They're an interesting problem though, because the ones that we see now are not the descendants of the birds that were here originally. I mean, originally before white settlement. When the Europeans began to settle New England, of course, the Canada goose was kind of an obvious target. And the hunting of Canada geese continued into the 19th century to such an extent that they were actually extirpated. They were just wiped out in much of the eastern United States. So the Canada geese that we see now here were brought in to the east, into New England, deliberately to restock, and they were brought from Midwestern birds. And that's one of the reasons why they don't migrate anymore. The original Canada goose was a migrating, in fact, the symbol of the Migratory Bird Act is a Canada goose, because the geese were one of the reasons why the Migratory Bird Act was passed, because Canada geese were being shot and they weren't able to make it up to Canada where they traditionally summered, and they would, they were being killed all over the United States. So when the shooting actually became controlled and the Migratory Bird Act was passed, by then the Canada goose was wiped out in our area. So they brought in these Midwestern birds, and they have somehow lost the desire to migrate. They do fly around a lot in the fall and they fly around in the spring, but they don't go anywhere. As we know, if we're near a field, where they live, like the high school playing fields, they stay around, they're just here all the time. And they manage to get through the winter. They will move around and look for open water. And when they find it, they can survive the winters here. So, but I don't think they're having any effect on the smaller birds, the passerines, the songbirds.
Okay, thank you. Michael wants to know, he says, 2 robin nests in my scrub seem to have been raided and eggs and chicks are taken. What animal would do this?
Well, there are a whole lot of animals and birds that will raid nests. Blue jays will raid nests, grackles will raid nests, blackbirds, starlings, even sparrows will do it. If they, you know, they're much smaller than robins, but they can still sometimes get into the nests and peck the eggs. Animals, red squirrels are very good at raiding birds' nests. Cats, obviously, domestic cats. That's why we say keep your cat indoors. The other, raccoons, skunks, if they can get to the nest, if it's a low nest, the skunk will raid. Opossums will raid nests. So it's really kind of a miracle that birds are able to survive at all. But when you think about it, I mean, the robin can do 2 or 3, sometimes 3 broods a summer. So if they were successful at raising every single egg in every single brood, we would be awash in robins, you know. Birds generally are less than 50% successful at raising chicks. And then the chicks are less than 50% able to make it through the first year. So that's just fact. That's nature and raw in tooth and claw.
Wow.
Jane?
Courtney would like to know, how do you journal or document which birds you see?
Well, we just kept a paper list for a long time, and now we have a spreadsheet. And I keep a little notebook, and I've kept it for years, and so I can go back and see. I like to record when the bird first appeared in the spring, and this is for migratory birds, of course, and when the bird disappeared in the fall, so that I can just kind of keep track. And I like to see, well, I should be expecting to see the orioles now, or the hummingbirds should be coming back. And that's just something that I'm interested in doing. There is, if you really get into birds, the eBird website that's run by Cornell University, you can keep your own lists on that site, and some people use it, have used it for years and years, and it's a kind of citizen science project, really, that people can contribute to the knowledge of birds by using the eBird website. It's such an incredibly rich website. I can't even begin to tell you how to use it. There are some people in town here who have been contributing to it for years. Anyway,
Okay.
that answers the question.
Ralph asks, we had 3 nests built on a rafter under our deck, only 2 feet from the ground. What type of birds nest like that?
It could be a robin, that's possible, although usually they don't like to go quite that low. They will nest under a high deck, you know, one that's maybe on the 2nd floor. But it's English sparrows, I mean European sparrows, I hate to tell you, but that's most likely what it is. There aren't a whole lot of songbirds that like to be that close to people. And I don't think a song sparrow, although they do nest low, but I think they would nest in a more natural environment. So if you hear a lot of cheep, 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 that's a house sparrow.
Deborah would like to know, birds have built under my deck. I believe they have left. What should I do with the old nests?
You don't need to worry about keeping those old nests. Birds, especially the songbirds, don't generally use the same nest again, which is smart of them because the nests can get infested with mites and things that are harmful to the baby birds. So you're welcome to just knock it down or clear it out because the birds aren't going to come back. The only birds that really reuse the nest year after year after year are the big um, what do you call them, the hawks and the owls that, you know, make gigantic nests, and the herons and things like that. But the small songbirds generally don't reuse a nest. They do, even the ones that dig holes in trees won't generally come back to the same hole. Sometimes another species will move in, but they will, if they need another nest, they will probably dig another hole.
We have a few more questions, but I wanted to ask, if you're not a Lexington resident and your library does not have the bird database, can they come to the Cary Library when we're open at some point and use the database on our computers eventually?
Yes, yes, you can do that. You can use it on it. And you can also subscribe to Birds of the World if you want to. It's a for-pay database from Cornell University. So if you go to the Cornell Ornithological Laboratory website, you can subscribe to Birds of the World yourself. Cornell also has, and I put it on the PowerPoint. They have a free website. It's called allaboutbirds.org, and it's kind of it's like a Birds of the World light. It's got all the birds that you need, but it has just briefer amounts of information. There's only like one video and one audio clip for each bird, but that definitely is a good source too.
Okay, thank you. Stephen says, the chickadee population seems to be way down. Are you seeing that?
Yes, and I think everybody is seeing that. That's a worrisome thing that bird watchers are worried about. In general, our bird populations are declining, and in some cases they're declining precipitously. It's not clear exactly why, and it's hard. It's a very hard thing to measure. What is the real population of birds? We're almost dependent on the memories of old people, like, you know, how many birds there used to be here, and now we're not seeing them anymore. In general, I think ornithologists think there are a couple things going on. One is climate change is affecting the birds. In one way, it affects migrating birds, especially the warblers, because they are coming up to the north with the expectation of certain insects being available to them. And when the climate has shifted, then the insects mature too early before the birds get there. And then the birds find not enough food, so their nesting success is not as good. One of the problems with chickadees, I think, is the destruction of the hemlocks. Chickadees loved the little cones that are found in huge numbers on mature hemlock trees. And the last decade or so, our hemlocks have been decimated by the woolly adelgid, which is a little insect that sucks the life out of the needles of the hemlock and has basically killed most of the hemlocks in our area. So that has to be a problem. But I think between general climate change problems and the destruction of the habitat of some of these birds, there's a lot more development in Lexington than there used to be. I mean, Lexington was 100 years ago, it was a land of big open fields, very few trees, mostly pasture land. And so we had a lot of birds that were birds of the grassland, and those birds are gone now. They're just gone. The meadowlark, the bobolink, we just don't see them in Lexington at all anymore. It also was a land of a lot of marshes and wetland. We had huge marshy areas in Lexington in the 1950s and earlier, and now most of those marshes have been drained and developed, so the marsh birds are gone, basically. The chickadee, I think, did benefit from the regrowth of trees, but still there aren't very many dead trees. I mean, most people remove dead trees, so that so it's harder for chickadees to find a place to nest. So I think there's a whole lot of things going on, but definitely people have noticed that the chickadee population is down.
Thank you. Tom says, I'm sure you're familiar with the Merlin Bird ID app for your phone.
I'm not, because I don't have a phone. So I'm not a cell phone user. So I know that these bird apps are wonderful, and I've been with people on field trips that are using them, and they're just great. So if you do have a smartphone, I definitely recommend looking into these apps. And I have a website on the PowerPoint that is a fellow who gives you a very good comparison of the different apps. So if you're looking for a particular one, or if you're not satisfied with the one you have, you might look at his guide. But me personally, I can't help you with bird apps.
Stephen says, a catbird recently came to our yard and seems to be staying around. Do you see them in this area?
Oh, yes, yes. And I'm going to talk about catbirds next month, because they are migratory birds. So they come in the spring, but they do breed here, and they're wonderful birds. I believe they are also birds that have kind of expanded their territory into the north in the past century, but I could be wrong about that. But they're great birds, and I encourage them. They're birds that generally won't come to a feeder, but you can hear them a lot and see them. They make really a cat noise, which is why they're called catbirds. They go meow, meow. So
awesome. I love your bird sounds. One last question from Francis. Okay. Has the current coronavirus pandemic affected bird populations?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't believe the coronavirus infects birds, which is something nice about it. It was originally a bat virus, but bats entertain lots of viruses in their bodies that don't spread to birds. The West Nile virus was an exception. It's a virus that affected humans and birds, and it did decimate the populations of some of the birds, but it seemed to affect mostly just the crows and the jays. So I don't think we need to worry about birds with the coronavirus, which is wonderful.
I think that Frances, and she just wrote this too, is wondering if less traffic and pollution is helping the birds.
Oh, I see what you mean. Is it a plus? Well, it certainly is a plus for hearing the birds. It's been wonderful in the mornings during this pandemic. I mean, the only real plus about the pandemic is that early in the mornings, there's not so much noise from 128 as there has been in the past, and it's easier to hear that dawn chorus. The dawn chorus of the birds is something that's kind of unique to the East, and it's a treasure that we have of the birds all joining together in song early in the morning. If you wake up at 6, you've missed it, but if you're up between 4 and 5, and you can hear the succession of the bird songs. In fact, Aldo Leopold, who was a great Wisconsin naturalist, in the later years of his life, when he lived in a cabin by himself and on his farm, he kept meticulous records of exactly which birds started to sing when. And he kept these records over years, and they formed the basis of a lot of the science of birdsong, and it's really fascinating. But I can see why you would get interested in doing that. Although I'm not quite ready to get up at 3:30 every morning.
Yeah, I think most of us are with you on that, Jean. Well, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. And I want to remind everybody that Jean will be back on Saturday, July 11th at 10 a.m. for a continuation of this conversation. So I hope you all can make it. Please sign up and we'll send you the link. Thank you, Jean. This has really been great.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone. Oh, sorry.
Bye.